some more kitchen table astronomy with Hampshire College astronomer from Kynot Studios, Dr. Salman Hameed. They say you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs, and since eggs are so expensive right now, we might as well build things more expensive than eggs, like rockets. And sometimes those rockets break too. There have been some successful space explorations over the last week, and some less successful ones that have made lots of headlines. Let's start with the positive first. What worked in the world of private and or public travel in space last week?
Well, so without breaking the egg, I mean the hard-boiled egg, or that did work, and that was for one company, that is Firefly Aerospace. They had a successful landing on the moon, and this is, if I remember correctly, I think this is the first private company to land successfully in one go. There have been others, and we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. But China has been the only one that has done lunar landing without a failure, especially the first time. And this Firefly Aerospace is the Blue Ghost lander. This is part of a program from NASA, which basically give a contract to private companies. It's CLPS, I think, Commercial Lunar Payload Services, where they ask private companies to take NASA payload to the moon. This is one of the programs that way they are bringing the private companies into the space program, and it was successful. It has 10 instruments over there. It reached one of the craters on the moon, filled with lava. I mean, long time ago, not right
Not
now.
currently. Oh, you ruined all of our equipment. You dumped it in this lava crater.
But it is designed to have several experiments that actually try to understand the impact of the lunar dust called regolith. It is sharp, it is angular. People are worried that if it goes into the instruments, it can cause problems. It also has health issues. And so some of the experiments dealt with how to clean off dust, for example, this new lunar regolith on instruments, but it also has a drill. It's a 9-foot drill that will go under the looking at under the surface and the crust, and to look for the flow of heat over there. It also has a computer that is designed to recover errors after being hit by radiation impacted by that. So it has it has 10 instruments, bunch of different things, and it actually was successful. And this particular company has 2 more missions coming up, one next year and then one in 2028 to the South Pole. And next year, I think they're going to the far side of the moon, which only so far China has been able to successfully land. So this was one of the successful things that happened. So I think that is it, right? We're not going to talk about anything else.
No other news stories happen about unsuccessful missions to outer space, except one.
Well, except 2, but one of the ones is Intuitive Machines, which also landed a few days after Firefly Aerospace's the Blue Ghost lander. So Intuitive Machines, we talked about a year ago. They had a lander that again was successful in landing, but then it tipped over. That lander was called Odysseus. It toppled over, and the new mission is called Athena. It landed over there, and it tipped over exactly in an identical manner. So,
fool me once, Odysseus, shame on you. Fool me twice, Athena, shame on me.
So you cannot blame them for inconsistency, I would say.
Right.
But so here is the thing. So some people are blaming their design. So this is actually a relatively tall. It's about 15-foot tall lander.
That'll do it.
Well, although the CEO of the company says actually that shouldn't be the case, that the center of gravity was actually balanced out because of the payload and so on and so forth. Nevertheless, there is some issue with something because it landed twice in the same way and tipped over.
I also want to say the Honda Odyssey is terrible.
That's right.
That's a year ago. My alternator blew en route to the path of totality. We almost didn't get to see the full. Remember that?
Correct. Yeah, I remember that.
Don't purchase a Honda Odyssey or an Odysseus or an Athena if you're going to outer space.
That's it. So wow, I mean that would be you found a workshop, I think, right before the totality on a Sunday or whatever
it was
that,
a
Monday, Tuesday.
Tuesday, yeah. Anyway.
But and it will be hard to find it on the moon.
Right.
So you really make sure what you have. So in this particular case, it was also carrying several payload from NASA. This particular lander, I mean, I think it was really cool because it was going to the lunar South Pole, and this is where we think there is water ice. We actually know there is water ice, but it was planning on. It also had a drill to look for how much water we can find or water ice we can find. It had a couple of rovers as well in there. In fact, there was still a little bit of hope that maybe the drill may still work if it is tipped over in a particular way, because you can get still some energy from the sun, but it doesn't look like it. And then rovers, there was still a little bit of hope that maybe, because some of them are self-charged, like maybe they can come out and actually do some roving. But as I checked recently, I don't think it's happening, and it's dead. Because remember, even the successful one, the Blue Ghost lander by Firefly Aerospace, that also works only for 2 weeks. That is the lunar day, which is about 2 weeks, and it can get energy from the sun. But once it goes to the next 14 days of night, meaning to say when you don't have the sun over there, it is so cold that these actually stop working. So
will they start again, or is it they have 2 weeks and then that's that?
So that's one of the things they want to do. Chinese missions have also tried this, that maybe it can come back, but the temperatures are so cold that I don't think it has happened that they survive the 2 weeks of extreme cold conditions and start working back up again. But these are all the types of challenges that you will have to deal with once you go to the moon, and how that's going to happen. If I can just mention one thing, so one of the cool ideas is in the lunar South Pole. The reason why there is this water ice, it's because there are these regions which are called permanently shadowed regions, and since astronomers like acronyms, so it's PSRs, and those are in the craters in the north and south poles, because the moon doesn't have much tilt. And so those regions in the North and South Pole never see sunlight. And so they always remain frozen, they never evaporate. But the rims of those craters always see sunlight. So one of the ideas is that perhaps if you are thinking about a base camp or sort of a lunar settlement over there, you can have sort of for energy purposes, you can have something on the rims of those craters, and then you can have other stuff close to where the water or ice exists. So
very interesting.
So the cool stuff, the science is actually really cool. But we may have to wait a little bit longer. And I should mention, just for completion's sake, there is another mission to the moon that is on its way. It's a resilience lander by iSpace company of Japan, and they are. It was launched actually same time I think as Intuitive Machines, but it is taking a little bit of a longer path. It's a cheaper path to get there, and it's expected to land there in May, and so we will have another update on that.
So it's interesting, these private-public partnerships of getting payloads to the moon. One was successful with NASA, one was not. And the other big news story was the head of DOGE and his rockets not going so well over the Gulf of SpaceX. I think we're calling it the Gulf of SpaceX debris right now.
That's right. So SpaceX has a big rocket, which is called Starship, and that was
called Jefferson Starship.
now
it's called Trump Starship. They're naming it after a different president.
And so that they've been making tries for that. This was its 8th flight. And look, I mean, failures are part of space. I mean, there is no question about that. And certainly Elon Musk and SpaceX believe that you launch it, if it fails, you learn from the failure and launch it again. And so this is part of this thing. Except that this particular launch was the second consecutive launch that have failed pretty much at the same place or before. So you would expect that after the previous failure that you are going to fix those to get to the next level.
Yeah.
This particular one, actually, it almost seems either at the same place or maybe a step backwards a little bit. But as you know, I mean, you mentioned it, these are the Starship, which is the largest rocket that humans have ever built. It is supposed to take humans to the moon and to Mars. And so these are test flights that are taking place. And they launch from the southernmost point, tip of Texas in Boca Chica. And you expect, like, so this was from there, and debris, as you mentioned, it also flies. Well, in this particular case, that some of the flights were disrupted all the way from Florida to Pennsylvania because of the debris falling, and there are some videos about it. You can actually see it.
It does look cool, but I mean, we don't want to mess up flight patterns any more than they've been messed up over the last couple months.
So that actually does happen, and so we have to figure out, sort of like, I mean, in theory, the plan is to have almost 25 flights per year or more to test it out, but right now it doesn't look anywhere close to it.
And the thing that's cool about these is they're reusable, right? Isn't that what Elon Musk's big thing was? That you wouldn't, usually a rocket goes up and that's it. These ones are supposed to go up and then come land back down and be able to be used again.
And in this particular case, so the lower booster, actually, they did come back and it was captured again successfully, which actually looks very cool. But the other one, actually, that was lost. The second phase of it, its booster actually didn't work in there. But the other concerns that people have, and that is about one is the ethical issues, because the permission. So when something fails, then the FAA, the Federal Aviation Authority, has to give permission to it, and usually it grounds it. It says, "Hey, you figure out." And right now, with all of the changes that are taking place, including a lot of staffing cuts in FAA, but FAA has also hired 3 SpaceX employees in order to upgrade their system. So there are clear conflict of interest, because FAA is the one that is evaluating these SpaceX launches, and it's giving permissions. And now, on the one hand, staff has been cut from FAA. On the other hand, 3 SpaceX employees have been hired by FAA to actually improve their systems, and so on and so forth. So we will see. They are promising that everything is all okay, that they will try to keep it separate, but as we know, that doesn't usually happen. Not to mention that already there were other agencies in the government, and I'm talking about the prior times, because now I don't know how much they are there. But for example, Wildlife and Fisheries Department were actually upset with SpaceX launches from Boca Chica, Texas. This is near Brownsville, Texas, because it is surrounded by region which has about close to about 500 species of birds, migratory birds, many of them threatened or endangered, and the debris comes in. It also have mangroves. It's a very delicate environment over there, right next to Gulf of Trump or whatever, Gulf of Mexico, and they've been concerned about it, and they have raised concerns to FAA. And in fact, the Wildlife and Fisheries, previously, there's a long investigation from the New York Times from about July of 2024, in which they looked at how these kind of permissions were given, because originally, apparently, SpaceX was planning on only launching smaller rockets, that is the Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy, but then they actually modified it to actually launch Starship that we mentioned, and created a much bigger footprint of employees also over there. It was supposed to be a much smaller base, but then the FAA also modified its permissions, and so on and so forth. So there is, here is a case. There are a couple of lawsuits there because of these environmental damages. There have been windows shattered. This was, I think, last year after one of the failures, all the way out in Mexico. Across from there. And so this is one of those things that we all have to think about, that space is important, or space is cool. You can also say space, maybe you can consider as perhaps space exploration, you can argue to be essential, and something that Elon Musk certainly argues, that he's trying to go to Mars in order to save humanity, which I think it's a problematic framing. It justifies a lot of bad things. But to balance it out with, well, the life here on Earth. So how many species you might think, hey, if they go extinct, that's okay as long as we have our rocket up? Or is there an alternative where you don't have to create that much damage in those particular locations? Those are questions that we ought to ask. And Elon Musk himself, by the way, talking about the blowing up stuff, the way he looked at this particular land in Boca Chica, he was quoted in a news conference in 2018 in which he says, we've got a lot of land with nobody around. And so if it blows up, it is cool. And so, so it's it's the callousness. Again, we have talked about it. I mean, how do you balance out, how do you do responsible space exploration, but to say like there is nobody around? I mean, there are a lot of issues over there. There's life around over there. There is a ecologically you are creating damage, and so to say, hey, that's okay, and not to even feel sort of like responsible, but rather to say, hey, but it is cool if things blow up.
Yeah.
And so it's I don't think at this point we should be any more surprised about a little adolescence and something in there, because it's like, like the government also, if it breaks, it's okay. It's kind of cool that we are laying off, I guess, half of the federal force, including, by the way, there may be NASA itself may be on a chopping block as well, because it is right now, the rumors that are out there that the next budget that's going to come out is going to reduce the NASA budget to half, and again, where it doesn't mean that you're not going to have investment in space, but again, it's going to get privatized, which has a lot of issues, including, for example, taxpayers not having access to some of the research that happens freely, like we talk about a lot of the telescope data or space data, space pictures we can always use. And Jared Isaacman, who's the head of NASA, I don't know if he has been confirmed. I don't think he has been confirmed yet. But he posted that personally, I think, he says, I don't know anything about these supposed cuts, but the president said he's targeting fraud, waste, and abuse with a scalpel, not a hatchet. And then he says, personally, I think there is a lot of taxpayer-funded science that should be reviewed and potentially reduced. This is the head of NASA, potentially head of NASA coming in. I mean, what fraud and waste in NASA funding that you can find for science funding? I mean, James Webb Space Telescope, I mean, it does find a lot of nebulae that has sort of like, elements that make up, like, elements that go out as waste. Maybe that? Which waste are we talking about?
Yeah.
So, problem, again, the underlying issue comes in is that the way things are progressing, there are conflicts of interest, and then the way the NASA budget is also planning on being cut, or science budgets in general. There was a Stand Up for Science march last Friday as well. The problem is that a lot of that stuff then becomes privatized, and it benefits public from a lot of the infrastructure that came from taxpayer funds. And so we will see what happens.
The other quick breaking story is that as we're seeing Donald Trump and Elon Musk having differences of opinion on how Doge should operate, Donald Trump and Elon Musk appear to have a difference in opinion as to where we should go explore. As yesterday, Donald Trump on Fox said he's not interested in going to Mars, as Elon Musk is.
Well, I mean, he mentioned earlier on, Donald Trump mentioned in his inaugural address also that we're going to go to Mars and so on and so forth. And so it looked like there is a debate about whether the NASA's direction should be first to the moon and then to Mars, or people like Musk who have been advocating very strongly that we should ditch the efforts to go back to the moon, the Artemis program, and rather just go to Mars. And it looked like, well, maybe President Trump, in his inaugural address, he's also suggesting the same thing. But yesterday, when this came up in an interview on Fox News, he says there is a lot of interest in going to Mars. This is, I'm quoting President Trump. Is it number one on my hit list? No, it is not really. But it is something that would be, it would be a great achievement. It would be a good thing if we could do it. So he sort of like, a little bit deprioritized. What does that mean for NASA direction? We don't know. I mean, it's like a lot of those things where people are trying to figure out what the priorities are going to be because so far, right now, all of the emphasis had been with the Artemis program. And I actually really do think that Artemis program should be prioritized with responsible lunar exploration. But we will see what happens. And so this is something that just happened, and maybe it is related to Doge or sort of like souring on a little bit on Elon Musk, but we will find out.
It's not just the Starship rocket that broke up. It may be the Trump Elon Musk love fest.
That is correct. But I want to end on a slightly not a hopeful, but sort of like positive thing, and what people can look forward to. There is a lunar eclipse that will be visible here, sort of like in the U.S. It's on the night, Thursday night, Friday morning, March 13th, March 14th, basically, and it's a lunar eclipse that totality begins at 2:26 a.m. So yeah, it's in the middle of the night. So yeah, you better.
Too bad I don't do the morning show anymore.
I
I would
know.
have already been up.
This would have been a perfect time
Yeah.
for you, and the totality is going to last about 66 minutes. So it's a long time. And again, just a reminder, unlike the solar eclipse, lunar eclipse, it's totally fine. In fact, you should look at it without any filters or anything. You just look at it. It's a long time, and it happens when the moon falls into the shadow of the Earth. And so the moon becomes almost like bronze reddish, and that is partly because of Earth's reflection, the light that is coming from it onto the moon. So it's actually really cool. And so it will, the totality, so the eclipse is going to start around 1 o'clock, 1:09, but the totality, it starts at 2:26 a.m. on Thursday night, Friday morning, basically, and ends at 3:32 a.m. So you have plenty of time to look at it if you set your alarm and you wake up. And although you can still catch it until 4:48 a.m., but that will be partial eclipse by that time. It will completely end. And one cool thing about that is that this will be an eclipse that will also be seen from the moon in the other way.
Whoa!
Where the sun is going to be eclipsed by the Earth, because as we talked about, Firefly Aerospace's the Blue Ghost lander is there, and it's going to be imaging, or I think it's going to be taking images of the Earth coming between, in front of the sun. So that's actually kind of really cool.
Yeah. It's like a selfie with, back and forth.
That's right. And so look at it. That will be cool. And so there is, the universe keeps on going. The universe doesn't care about all of these other, our things that we are doing. So get up, and I think the weather is starting to get better. So I think it won't be freezing at 3 in the morning.